Kate, thank you so much for joining me today. And I was wondering off the top, my first question is, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at the Alias Group.
I am a Salesforce consultant for the Alias Group. We do Salesforce implementations, optimizations, and we also have managed services. So we can offer Salesforce admin on demand type program where we basically service the client for any admin needs that they have in their Salesforce system. So I work as a consultant and project manager. So I build solutions for customers based on their needs. We do implementations, so new Salesforce implementations. And then also if a client comes and wants to do optimize and implement new technology, either through an integration or new technology as far as using the Salesforce platform functionality. So we will also work through those projects. And then I manage our admins to do that admin on demand program. Requests come in from the client. We've been working in their org. We know how it works, and we facilitate those requests, kind of just like an extension of their external team. So really, Salesforce, anything that you need with Salesforce, we do. So
that's fantastic. And I was checking out your site, and I also see that your company does outsourced inside sales.
That's
Can you
true.
tell me a little bit about what that means exactly?
Awesome. So we actually, that's kind of how we started. So we're really a sales organization. Our company started a long time ago, becoming an outsourced sales unit for a large chemical company. And we basically mastered that skill of selling other companies' products, starting in manufacturing. So our sales reps will represent another company as them. That's where the name, the Alias Group, came from. So they would have an email address, a phone number, everything that correlates to the company. A lot of our current outside sales people or inside sales people do appointment setting and lead generation. So they're passing off to an inside team where maybe it's a more engineered solution and they need more, it's a more complex sales cycle. But we also have some people who will sell commoditized products, they can take that straight to close. So that's how we actually birthed our Salesforce consulting firm, is that we use Salesforce ourselves. We were configuring it for the clients we were bringing on, and we figured, well, we can do the same thing by putting a sales process that works in place in a CRM for other companies. And so that's kind of where the consulting piece came out of.
That's really interesting, and I always wondered the Alias Group. So thanks for telling me about the name.
Yeah, so we put on the mask, and it's not as true in our consulting business because we're not necessarily, but we do extend the team. So with our admin on demand service, and we understand how salespeople run through the sales process, so we can consult on that sales process because we're sellers ourselves.
Understood. And I believe the head of digital marketing analytics at Google once said, if he has a budget, he would rather spend 10% of the budget on the tool and 90% on the person. And it sounds like that's kind of your philosophy, maybe not necessarily those percentages, but the person using the tool is far more important than the tool.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And also the process, right? Like we don't understand what the process is that person's trying to do. We can put all the technology in place, but it could still not work.
Is it a budget consideration for a company? Are they maybe a growing company that's very small and it just saves them on overhead to hire a company who has many years combined sales experience, that understand it through and through, versus trying to maybe hire a few people and train them and provide, the overhead behind all of that?
Yeah, so I think there's probably, two ways that this goes. One way is the salespeople at the company are supposed to be hunting, but they're not. So they would bring us in to be kind of that top of the funnel. Let's put a lot of people in the top of your funnel that are pre-qualified, and then let your sales team do what they're good at, which is taking it to close. So some of our customers are coming in like that. The other thing we would say is, yes, if you have one inside salesperson sitting at your company, somebody has to manage them, train them. They have no camaraderie because there's no one else doing that role. So it works better in an organization that has multiple people doing that at the same time. They're not selling the same product or the same service, but they have training. They have a manager who understands exactly what they're trying to do every day, who's coaching other people who are doing that same thing. And then they also have camaraderie and can throw things off of each other because there's other people doing the function there. Where if you have one person sitting at your company and nobody else is doing what they're doing, no manager understands, how to coach them or how to help them to be more successful, it oftentimes fails. So companies would come to us. Sometimes we are facilitating just one person. Other times it could be multiple inside sales seats that are sitting here. So
gotcha, understood. I think out of all of those things, the visibility is huge of the pipeline. And I think it's amazing how it's almost like a light going on when Salesforce is implemented, everybody's trained. And then also the fact that I hear it all the time, spreadsheets stuck on computers. Somebody once told me they use Post-it notes. So imagine Post-it notes everywhere.
On a board, I've seen that.
Yeah, and they said that they'll even move the Post-it note to the front of the part where they build the stuff, and then if that Post-it note falls, that customer isn't getting their order on time. I heard this more than once, but or they're just like nobody knows what's going on at any given time. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the philosophy of CRM, but specifically Salesforce and how it helps companies.
Yeah, I do think visibility, like you mentioned, is one of the biggest things. I also think, obviously accountability for salespeople to their manager, to the company, and to each other is super important. And I also think that long-term, the data will help companies make strategic decisions, where if it's on a spreadsheet, at the end of the year and at the end of 3 years, are you going to be able to really use that data to tell you, the sales cycle was X long. When we did this, it shortened the sales cycle. When we, this source of our business was the strongest for closing. This source was the strongest for bringing in leads, but it didn't close us any business. So I think tracking the sales cycle from the first interaction or the lead coming in or the lead being put into the system all the way to the end of the sales cycle, and then retention of that client if there's a retention issue, where they need them to buy something over and over, or they need them to. And so I think the data going in and then being able, the sales manager and the company as a whole being able to analyze that data to build strategy that's going to save the company time and money and energy makes a lot of sense. And I think the data could be all there on a spreadsheet, but it's not going to be very accessible for everyone to build, to analyze and look at and understand. And you have to have a person who's doing that, really. And if it's in a spreadsheet, someone taking a lot of time to build reporting and understand the data and analyze it. Where if you're building a Salesforce dashboard based on those things, those KPIs you want to look at the end of the year, you can pull it up in your strategy meeting and have a really clear picture of what happened last year versus 3 years ago, and kind of the tracking of the data. I do think analytics is one of the biggest benefits at the end of putting in a CRM. It's a lot of work, but then you do get that huge benefit of being able to click a button and see what happened last year.
Yeah. And I mean, that is so valuable. And another thing I forgot to mention was I heard from more than one customer, they said not only do they have spreadsheets, but what happens is they'll make a copy of it, name it like revision 6, and then email it. And then somebody will make a copy and call it revision 7. And they're going to lose track of even those
Yeah, who
too.
has
So,
7?
yeah, right. It's like, was there a 9? Was there what? And then, so I love the accountability. I love being able to, like you said, go back not just 1 year, but 2, 3 years and see.
And if somebody leaves, a lot of times the
Oh,
spreadsheet leaves with them. So you could be like, we don't even know who that person was
oh,
talking to and what they were doing. With a Salesforce license, if you have a salesperson leave, you can turn off their license, you can reassign all their things, and all the activity history is right there. They can see what time, when that last person was last contacted, what happened in that conversation, all the emails that were sent. I mean, I just think for transitions, which we're experiencing, I think a lot in our work culture right now, it will make a huge difference. Obviously, transitioning in salesperson is already a heavy lift, but if you also have to like start at 0, that's
oh, yeah.
really tough. So,
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you say the culture shift. It's, I pop on LinkedIn and I'm just like, oh, I wonder what's going on in the news. And they quit calling it the Great Resignation. Instead, they call it the Great Reshuffle. So you could have somebody there, and in 6 months to a year, they're jumping to a higher paying job.
yep.
Of course, now the long term is, I don't want to get too off topic. They're realizing there's something to be said about staying at a company you're comfortable with and everything. But for like a head of sales, that's can become a real nightmare
Right.
where,
And that they've got people coming in and out all the time, and it's super challenging. I think all employers are hitting that problem right now. And at least if you have a record of what your employees were doing, then at least you can pick up where they left off. Where if you're dealing with people who left and also all the contacts they had built left too, then you're really starting at 0. So
yeah. And that's terrible because not every business is going to have just a one and done customer. They're going to have these relationships, and they're going to want to be able to get somebody in to kind of take over and continue with that relationship of whatever it is that maybe they're selling or et cetera, et cetera. I do want to talk a little bit about Salesforce and construction, but before I do that, I wanted to, kind of touch upon Commercient Sync and how that kind of works with Salesforce and your clients, our mutual clients. What is the value of having that ERP data being synced over to Salesforce? But could you tell me about the importance of having, that accounting data from an ERP in Salesforce for the sales team?
yeah, so I mean, we've done a number of ERP integrations with Salesforce, and most of the time, there's a couple of, I think, key things. One would be that the accounting system and the sales system mirror each other, right? So if there is, like, say, the billing address changes or the billing contact changes, to be able to have, that information transparent to billing and to sales. The one company that we did was a construction type company, and they needed to pull the sites from the accounting system because it was like one account might own also multiple sites, and they were getting a lot of duplication in their system from all the different sites because they might put the site in as a different account or whatever the system, whatever the situation. So having those two systems speak to each other really helped them to have their data consistent across the organization from sales to operations. And then I think the other piece is they can go in and see the history. So they could see, oh, they did a job last year for this and they didn't have to guess, because otherwise they didn't have access to the accounting system. So we could put data in Salesforce without putting all the accounting data, without giving them access to all the accounting data. We could give them the data that meant something to them. So whether that was orders or work orders, those things could help them see what the history of the customer was. And then the other thing that they could see was right, like this customer called in, just the interactions from the customer. And I think being able to run revenue reporting in Salesforce from actual revenue data and comparing it against opportunity closed deals. Obviously when you're closing an opportunity, it may not be the actual revenue that came in. So then you can start to compare those two things. So putting the actual revenue data in the hands of the salespeople really helped educate who they focused on, what they spent their time doing, and also kind of just getting a grounding. Like you said, if you're going to see a customer, instead of having to request from accounting that you get a report of, you can just jump into Salesforce, you could run your own report or just look at the account history, of the orders or the work orders and get that data real quick for yourself while you're on the road. If you're on the road, you can get it right in the Salesforce mobile app. So I think having that data in there and being able to filter it to only really what the salespeople needed, because they oftentimes don't need to see everything. They just need to see a bit. So
Yeah, I think invoicing, because in all of that was awesome. Thank you. I was looking at a quote that you gave me when we were talking, and you said you could be the construction company and you have one client, but they have multiple job sites. And you have to be able to send that invoice to the right one. And it's something that I guess I don't think too much about, but if that invoice, for example, goes to the wrong site, that means that much more time to get paid.
yeah.
And
So that was actually one of the issues the construction was having, is sales was saying, here's the account, but it wasn't the right billing data.
oh,
And so they would send it, but then you're like in a collection state, but that person never received it. So you can't try to collect the money
yeah.
when the right company or right address or contact or whatever didn't receive it. So a lot of it has to do with being consistent.
And the other interesting thing you had mentioned was customer management, account management, just popping into Salesforce, seeing what's going on. You mentioned the growth of a customer, and then looking at a bunch of customers, there's variance of who's up, who's down, and you can tailor your marketing on maybe there's something specific that's kind of selling a little bit more than something else. And then maybe you could jump into a call with a customer who maybe things have been kind of going down a little bit.
Yep.
You can probably jump on the call and save it, a little bit more. And I think you had mentioned that, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so variance reporting is really important for salespeople as they manage accounts, because if the customer stops ordering or they stop ordering a certain product line, then you could start to pick up on trends that maybe they went to a competitor or they're having an issue. And usually by a phone call, some outreach, you can start to facilitate why that's happening, and also gives you some market data, right? So if they went to a competitor, it could be because of pricing, and then you can bring that back to your company and figure out if you need to adjust pricing, kind of back to strategy. But if you have to wait, you may not notice that variance going down, that downtrend. So yeah, a lot of times we're setting up like these people haven't ordered, they'd ordered 0 in the last time, X time frame, or their order volume went down by 20%. And even we can set up like tasks, alerts, emails to go to salespeople where they can get the report in their inbox to say, hey, here's all the customers that are down 20% in the last month. That really helps the salespeople to stay on top of the accounts and understand where their attention is needed, and if there is that potential for competitor market share, or even if people go up, we often have that scenario where we'll create reports for our customers for this is up 30%, because the customer can call and be like, hey, you're growing, what's going on? There may be room for additional upselling when a customer is up. So I think just having that data, and then Salesforce gives you the ability to really alert salespeople in multiple ways. So that's helpful for them to kind of get it in a way that would help them to act on it, to create actionable items right away.
Yeah, that's excellent. And thank you for that. And now kind of backtracking a little bit, when I've talked to various companies within the greater construction that are our clients, for example, we have a customer that all they do is flooring. And they hired somebody specific because they knew they needed to get into CRM. And so they jumped in, but they were kind of blunt too. They told me that, you know, they didn't think they would need a CRM in something along the lines of construction, but when they did implement a Salesforce or something else, it was like a light going on for them. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that. It's maybe it's just me, but I have heard construction or anything related in that field that they never thought they would need it, but once they did get it in a Salesforce, it really changed everything, and it changed their philosophy. And I was wondering if you could talk about the benefits of Salesforce in construction.
Yeah, so I think obviously, you know, being an industry that is really needed, I think sometimes, you know, they'll call us, we don't have to call them, is kind of the mentality in a lot of businesses where there's a lot of demand. But I do think that there's still a need for a CRM to prioritize that, to understand the data, to keep track of follow-ups. I know that construction companies, and obviously there's a broad range of what we could be talking about, like a small company, a huge, you know,
Right.
all different kinds of companies. But even just keeping track of all that they have going on in the sales process can be super overwhelming. And I think a lot of things fall through the cracks. So again, I mean, I think we're back to visibility, just understanding that you can get that data at any point. I think that's where the light goes on. It's like, oh, look, there's all the deals, and there's where all our deals came from last year. And these customers could buy something ongoing, or they have more opportunity, and having a central place where the customer is represented is super important for any company. And I think construction isn't really different in that way. I think it can benefit from that.
Understood. And I like what you said, because they're not worried about the phone ringing because it is ringing, whereas other businesses that they're using Salesforce to kind of be more proactive with their sales.
Yeah.
So excellent.
Yep.
I guess I'll ask one more question regarding Commercient. I think when we spoke about another client, you had mentioned, you know, as a consultant, you could bring somebody in to build a data integration. But if I'm not mistaken, you had mentioned if that client suddenly said, oh, we need to update our ERP. And it's not as simple as like when I update my iPhone. It can be pretty complex and very expensive too. But then all of a sudden, you have to rebuild the entire data integration plus support it. If something happens, then you're having to dedicate, you know, time and people to support that and everything. So I guess my question is, what are the advantages of working with Commercient on just specifically the ERP and Salesforce data integration?
Yeah. So we had a client, I think that you're referring to, that was considering an ERP upgrade within 2 or 3 years of when we were building the integration. And I said, look, we can build a custom integration, but my developer's saying it's not going to translate. So once you upgrade 2 or 3 years, which I think it's been longer than 2 or 3 years, and I don't think they've upgraded yet.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's not going to make sense. And you're going to have to basically redo the integration. You know, there's not going to be much that's translatable between those two. So I think the true benefit is that you can, you know, it's managed. You can switch it on, it works. And there is some configuration on both Commercient and on Salesforce side. And, we usually help with the Salesforce side, and then we'll work with Commercient to make sure the requirements translate. But I would say that's like the number one benefit, that it's more pre-built, and that then you're not looking at maintaining it long-term with a developer, or, a potential change in the product would make it difficult to maintain that maintain that. So I think that was, for that customer, that made a lot of sense. But then we had our other customer who didn't have a necessarily didn't have a planned change in place, that we still felt like it was the best possible recommendation. So
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate, very much for your time. It was really great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Heath.